Jimmy's remarks about Charlie Kirk were tasteless, and ABC and its affiliates would have been fully within their rights to fire him or simply to no longer air his program. That was their choice.
And is that how non-disclosure orders work as well, that you can get a non-disclosure order against specific individuals, not to notify specific individuals, if there's some suggestion that somewhere someone in the universe might disclose or tamper with evidence somehow in some way? Is that how a specific non-disclosure order works? I've never heard of such a thing, but maybe I just missed it.
That's the point where Smith's team should have told Judge Boasberg, these are senators, and there are different obligations under the law for how we treat them.
And what will the benefits to consumers be of 800 megahertz of spectrum being made available for auction for the private sector?
First of all, this will allow us to catch back up to China. When President Trump left at the end of his Trump 45 administration, we had leapfrogged China and were set up in a very good position. But then we didn't move forward with any new spectrum bands, and China moved ahead. So this is important for national security, but also for prices for consumers.
Thank you to each of you. Chairman Carr, let's start with free speech. I think you would agree that the FCC's public interest standard has been weaponized against conservatives in the past. In 2018, Senate Democrats tried to pressure the FCC to use the public interest standard to stop Sinclair Broadcasting Group from acquiring Tribune Media. In 2023, leftists sought to stop a routine renewal of a Fox-owned broadcast station over complaints about 2020 election coverage. Do you agree that that was wrong?
Yes, Senator, I agree. And those are cases, in fact, where rather than following FCC precedent, the agency broke from it and did so in a weaponized way.
Now, another area of agreement between you and I is that Jimmy Kimmel is angry, overtly partisan, and profoundly unfunny. That, sadly, is true. Jimmy's remarks about Charlie Kirk were tasteless, and ABC and its affiliates would have been fully within their rights to fire him or simply to no longer air his program. That was their choice. But what government cannot do is force private entities to take actions that the government cannot take directly. Government officials threatening adverse consequences for disfavored content is an unconstitutional coercion that chills protected speech. This is why it was so insidious how the Biden administration jawboned social media into shutting down conservatives online over accurate information on COVID or voter fraud. My Democrat colleagues were persistently silent over that scandal, but I welcome them now having discovered the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. Democrat or Republican, we cannot have the government arbitrating truth or opinion. Mr. Chairman, my question is this. So long as there is a public interest standard, shouldn't it be understood to encompass robust First Amendment protections to ensure that the FCC cannot use it to chill speech?
Yes, Senator, I agree with you there. And I think the examples you laid out of weaponization during the Biden years are perfect examples. The Fox case you mentioned was a renewal for a broadcast TV license, and petitioners sought to have the FCC not renew it based on content that aired on a separate cable channel. In the cable context, it's entirely different. There's no license, there's no public interest standard. So first and foremost, we have to make sure the FCC is hewing to precedent. Similarly, we saw Democrats in Congress write letters to cable companies, pressuring them to drop Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax because they disagreed with the political perspectives of those cable channels. And there, again, it was cable. No broadcast license, no public interest standard. So the FCC has to write within the four corners of our precedents to be consistent with the Communications Act and the First Amendment concerns as well.
All right, let's shift to spectrum. One of the biggest economic and national security wins in the Working Families Tax Cut Act was restoring the FCC's auction authority and creating the largest spectrum pipeline, 800 megahertz of spectrum, in U.S. history. It won't just bring faster and cheaper wireless to consumers, but it will keep the United States competitive in the global 6G race against Communist China. I'm encouraged that the FCC has already begun the process of freeing up potentially as much as 180 megahertz of C-band spectrum. Chairman Carr, is the Commission on track to meet the law's spectrum deadlines and to fully deliver on the bill's obligations?
Yes, Senator. And again, thank you to you for restoring the FCC's auction authority. We had fallen into a deep spectrum malaise during the Biden years. We were losing our leadership position. Right now, we're very actively working with our partners across government, Department of Transportation, FAA, NTIA, and we're all aligned to deliver on the statutory deadline of July 2027 for that auction.
And what will the benefits to consumers be of 800 megahertz of spectrum being made available for auction for the private sector?
First of all, this will allow us to catch back up to China. When President Trump left at the end of his Trump 45 administration, we had leapfrogged China and were set up in a very good position. But then we didn't move forward with any new spectrum bands, and China moved ahead. So this is important for national security, but also for prices for consumers. The data shows when we free up more spectrum, we can allow providers, for instance, to compete for in-home broadband. And when they do that with fixed wireless, we've seen that cable modem prices drop by 37% where they used to have a monopoly. So it's good for our economy, for innovation, and for prices for consumers as well.
Commissioner Trusty, how does the spectrum auction pipeline and the Working Families Tax Cut help position the United States for success at the 2027 World Radio Conference?
Yes, thank you so much for the question, Senator, and thank you again for your leadership in restoring the FCC's General Spectrum Auction Authority and creating this long-term spectrum pipeline. I think these spectrum provisions are foundational to developing a unified strategy going into the next World Radio Communications Conference, where we can focus on key U.S. interests. We can work with our international allies in advance to preempt those who are seeking to undermine U.S. interests at the conference in Shanghai, China. In 2023, at the last World Radio Communications Conference, we didn't have this kind of legislative backing or support. We didn't have auction authority. We didn't have a long-term spectrum pipeline, and so we were sidelined on very important conversations. Now that we have this authority, thanks to your leadership, we can constructively and meaningfully engage in these conversations that I think position us better to come out of this conference with wins that are essential for our economic and national security and global leadership in next-generation communications technologies.
Terrific. Thank you. Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. I just want to, maybe I'll start with you, Professor Luther, and just see if I can figure out what the baseline here is. We've now learned today, it's been said over and over by our Democrat colleagues, that Judge Boasberg can't be held to account. He did nothing wrong because he had no idea whose records he was issuing subpoenas for. And he didn't inquire, he didn't ask, he just signed it, as Senator Cruz was just saying. That is despite 2 U.S.C. Section 6628C. So is that just how it works, that it's fine, the judge can just, whatever DOJ says, he doesn't need to inquire, separation of powers concerns, he doesn't need to ask about it. It doesn't matter, he can just sign it.
That's certainly not how it's supposed to be, but based on the evidence that's publicly disclosed, that seems to be the best evidence of what happened.
And is that how non-disclosure orders work as well, that you can get a non-disclosure order against specific individuals, not to notify specific individuals, if there's some suggestion that somewhere someone in the universe might disclose or tamper with evidence somehow in some way? Is that how a specific non-disclosure order works? I've never heard of such a thing, but maybe I just missed it.
That's the point where Smith's team should have told Judge Boasberg, these are senators, and there are different obligations under the law for how we treat them.
I've never heard of a non-disclosure order. I was the Attorney General of my state. We sought these things in the past. I've never heard of one where you said, well, actually, we can't offer you any evidence that any of the people targeted in the order would actually tamper, but somebody out there somewhere might maybe take our word for it, sign the order, and he does it anyway. I mean, let me just say it this way. Does this actually exonerate Judge Boasberg? I mean, does this make it better? My Democrat colleagues have offered this as, oh, he's just doing his job. Does this make it better or make it worse?
No, I think what has shifted from maybe a month ago when this broke for the first time is it's not so much that Judge Boasberg is being intentionally, it's not intentional, it's more negligent. And that's I think, the situation.
It's grossly negligent, but I'll just say this. Here's my bigger issue, is that there's a pattern here with what happened in the last 4 years, where every time it comes to hold somebody accountable for something that happened to real people, there's always an excuse as to why it can't be done. And senators, sure, whatever, but let's talk about the individual private American citizens who had SWAT teams sent to their homes in the early morning hours to take them into custody for protesting peacefully, saying prayers outside of an abortion clinic. I'm thinking about Mark Houck and his family. An FBI SWAT team came to his home, armed, a SWAT team, took him into custody, dragged him off. He was later acquitted, by the way, by a jury for any wrongdoing. We had the anti-terrorism division of the FBI activated against parents who went to school board meetings and asked about their children wearing masks at these meetings. The anti-terrorism division. We had the FBI recruiting informants, that's spies, into Catholic parishes in this country, making a list of churches that the FBI, or at least the Richmond field office, had serious security concerns about, singling them out for disfavorable treatment. As far as I know, nobody associated with anything I have just mentioned has been disciplined in any way. In any way. So maybe you think, I don't care about the senators, they get what's coming to them, fine. What about individual private citizens who are just exercising their constitutional rights? What about parents who are just going to school board meetings? What about parishioners who are coming to church in a church of their choice in the United States of America and have their own government recruiting informants into the church? It is a gross pattern of abuse of law that went on for 4 years in this country like I have never seen or read about in the history of this country. And nobody, to my knowledge, nobody has been held accountable. And now we're told today, well, you sure as heck can't do it for this judge or any other judge, and you can't touch anybody who went after these parents or went after these parishioners. Nope, you just move on. What is it that one of my colleagues said a minute ago? This is just a show. This is just a show. No, actually, it's not a show. All of these things happened. This is not a game. People's rights were violated. People of faith were targeted in extreme ways, and nobody's been held accountable for it. And I don't recognize this country or our Constitution in those practices. And if this is allowed to go on, we won't have either of those things in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.